Mark Donnelly of HUH, you are very welcome to the Lead Well podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here back in the studio.
This is my second time this week introducing you. You gave a fantastic talk during the week in one of our corporate clients. Very well received.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Like twice a week. The pleasure is all mine. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to a really interesting and insightful conversation.
Brilliant. So maybe we could start with giving listeners a little bit of a background to who you are, Mark, and what is HUH.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who hasn't seen this brand here, it's on my hoodie, it's on my arm, it's on my car, and it's everything I do. It's like my whole life evolves around HUH clothing, but it stands for How's Your Head, and it's an Irish mental health awareness clothing brand raising money and awareness for organisations in need. So I set the brand up about 4 years ago now, and when I moved back to Ireland, which we can get into as the podcast goes on, but the kind of quick answer to just kick us off is How's Your Head, an Irish mental health awareness clothing brand.
Excellent. And yeah, there's a big backstory that we look forward to obviously delving into today during the episode. One thing that was quite interesting that I really took out of your talk during the week, and maybe we can start there, because as we know, this podcast is very much looking under the hood of a founder's journey. And you made a really nice comment, which was this idea of comparison, comparing ourselves to others. And you talked about, obviously, Gymshark, young founder, and how it's so important for you to make sure that you don't fall into that comparison trap. And I think with the way social media is, it's quite hard for us, isn't it? Everybody, I'm sure, it's like the constant highlight reel of everybody else. So maybe, talk to us a little bit more about that.
100%. I would often say, and we've heard it loads of times before, is comparison is the thief of joy. And I just know personally, as I grew up, I would constantly compare myself. So I struggled with my mental health, which is why I set up the mental health awareness clothing brand, be it with self-image, self-confidence. So I was constantly always comparing myself. And over the years, as I've grown older and gotten supports and went to professional help and stuff like that, I'm trying to learn and to practice what I preach, in the sense that, for example, using the likes of Gymshark, Ben Francis doing amazing things. And we could sit here and compare ourselves to him all day long, but we're completely different. He's from a different place, from a different country, in a different industry. But with social media, and we're so addicted to the phones and over consuming with YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, we can slip easily in and fall easily into the trap of like, why don't I look like him or her? And why don't I have as much money or followers as them? And I think in my talks, I really like to highlight it, especially in schools, to younger people, of like, what you see on social media is fake. You just see the highlights. You just see the best parts. You don't see when they're at home in tears or laying up at night, or when shit is hitting the fan, essentially. And that's kind of why I do like to highlight that point, because not everything is as what it seems to be.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's a really nice point, because we don't get to see a lot of the time the tough days. We get to see when things are going really well. And naturally, that's what we like to share. We want people to see our best side. But give us a little bit of an indication as to what it's like, solo founder, running your own business, trying to grow your own business, still quite a young guy yourself as well. What's the day-to-day life like for Mark Donnelly?
Yeah, so it's really changed over the years, okay? So I would call myself like a chameleon. I'll adapt to my surroundings. And as a small business owner, it is really tough. Be it with, let's say, cash flow, be it like getting sales in, business, new corporate orders, whatever it might be, it's stressful. And I have to kind of remind myself that it's worth the stress, because there's certain things in life that just won't be worth it. But over the last 4 years, if you kind of look at it as a whole, it started quite heavily on TikTok with direct to consumers, and I would spend all my days packing orders. As it moved on, the first 2 years, we flew it. Like, I couldn't get a second. Like, it was constantly packing orders. The people of Ireland were in full support of it. But as we kind of came out of COVID, and even in recent months, we spoke about it just before we went live, is the cost of living crisis. So my day-to-day has changed dramatically from, let's say, just doing all day, every day, packing orders, fulfilling orders, and trying to get more stock in, to kind of coming to a point where it slowed down. I shifted my business to corporate work. So now the day is focusing on corporate talks, school talks, and bulk orders. So I do still run at 1,000,000 miles a minute, which I try to stop and try to slow myself down. But kind of Monday to Friday is made up of corporate talks, school talks, bulk custom orders. There are still direct to consumer orders. I make sure to get an hour of training in a day to clear my head and make sure, right, this is me time, like no one else. And I also have another full-time job. So I'm the marketing manager for a hospitality group in Dublin. So I run their social media. And that kind of came off the back of my success on social media with HUH.
Pretty good.
Probably biting off a bit more than I can chew because I have a full-time job in what I do. But I'm kind of like that. I just keep going. And it's probably something I need to slow down on.
And talk to me about the awareness of knowing, what your boundaries are with that, because you've just mentioned there, you've got like 2 full-time jobs on the run. You're growing this business. You're in every facet of the business.
Yeah.
How are you able to notice when, okay, you know what, I'm kind of burning the candle at both ends here. I need to maybe take a step back.
Yeah, it's interesting because the last 9 months I have been really burning the candle at both ends because I've been training quite a lot too, like intense training, 6 days a week, 7 days a week. And to be perfectly honest, I think it's this week I've noticed my body is totally wrecked. And only as recently as last weekend, I did a very long distance. I did a 45-kilometer cycle, got off the bike and did a 45-kilometer run back. And it was kind of the first time I've ever done something that, like that sort of distance. And I wanted to push the body and mind to the limits. But since then, I actually haven't let my body recover. So I'm fairly wrecked this week. And then obviously my busy work week. So this week is actually a good example of saying, Mark, you've been here before. Let's slow down. So for the weekend, I have literally planned to do nothing. I'm going to relax because I've seen in the past when I don't, you just burn out. And then you can't put whatever you want to put into next week because it just carries on and carries over. But 3 or 4 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to have the self-awareness to highlight the fact that your body and your mind needs a break. So that's what I'm doing this weekend.
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Brilliant. And can I ask you, when you now have this bit of downtime over the weekend, will there be that little voice inside your head saying, you could be doing a little bit more here?
There'll be complete and utter shame. I will sit on the couch and I'll be fidgety. I'll be like, oh, but I could just send this email because that will have to be done anyway for Monday morning. And it will take a lot for me to not do it. But actually in the recent talk that you brought me into during the week is someone asked me a question on boundaries like that. And what I do is I take myself out of the environment. So by say I'm doing nothing, it still might mean I'll go for a walk on the beach, but it's not intense. It's not work. And it kind of takes me out. I'm in nature. But the reason being is I'm not near the laptop. I'm not near the gym. So the 2 things that really take up a lot of my time and one of my thoughts, I remove myself from the environment. And that's the only way I can kind of do it. Because if I sit on the couch, I know I'll end up going into the office or taking out the laptop. And again, as the owner of a mental health brand and as someone who struggled with their mental health, like for 14 years, and it's ongoing to be honest, but I haven't figured out how to actually find the perfect balance.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I ever will, to be honest.
I'm still trying to search for that as well, to be honest. And obviously we've a few quick fire questions at you there, right? And the reason being, we talked a little bit about the comparison aspect. You brought it up during the week. I thought you framed it really well for the audience and it really related. But I would see that as a skill that develops over time. I'm sure you'd agree. And then what we spoke about there, obviously, is around this idea of trying to fight against that feeling of shame, guilt, I should be doing more. Because again, that's another skill I find that founders in particular really battle with. So the comparison aspect, as well as, okay, there's always more to be done. How do I build in those boundaries? And I'm just wondering, maybe a nice way to frame that for us is to bring us back to the initial starting journey of HUH and how you built up, I suppose, some of the skills that you have now in your, I suppose, your ability to be able to run a business, manage your well-being, etc.
So I think the first thing to say is like resilience has been a massive part of my business journey, but that's been a lot of my life. So since a young age to today, it's been a journey of resilience, which has definitely been incorporated into my business. So if we kind of go back in time and maybe give you a bit of an understanding to why I set the business up, and then I can talk about maybe incorporating that into like the day-to-day and the month-to-month of running the business is... So I would have suffered with anxiety, OCD, self-image, self-confidence, and that's the reason why I set up HUH Clothing. And it's a minimalist design, as you can see here, the 3 letters. And the reason it's HUH is because I wanted people to be like, huh, what is that? And I wanted people to ask me the questions I was never asked as a youngster. And when I'm in schools and businesses, I'm saying, this talk I'm doing now is something I would have loved 10 years ago. because I could have related to it, but I had never anyone to relate to when I was struggling with my intrusive thoughts or irrational fears or self-image issues. And that's how I built up all this resilience. I would call it resilience over the years, but it was a struggle of not knowing what to do, where to go, and how to say it. So I set up a brand as a selfish form of self-expression, I say, because I never got asked these questions. And now I'm empowering the customer who wears it in their own lives for people to ask them. And if you look at all of our reviews and our DMs and just emails, it's I wore this to a family gathering. My cousin was kind of slagging me going, huh? And next thing you know, we spoke for 45 minutes about mental health. And that's kind of what I'm doing with the brand. But if we kind of go back through it, with anxiety over the years and self-image, it was kind of pure grit and resilience of day after day after day showing up for myself. And over the years, with OCD, for example, and I'm conscious that I'll just keep rambling, right? But for my anxiety turned into OCD and I became obsessed. And that character trait and that struggle is still inside of me. And I have to make sure I use it for good. So for example, I became obsessed when I was younger of eating unhealthy foods. But I used to eat all this unhealthy food in order to suppress my feelings, right? After I realized, okay, this is affecting my sport. I was really into GAA. It was taking an effect on my mental health, my physical health. I flipped the switch and I became obsessed with running. So one year I ran for 365 days. I lost 6 stone. I looked a completely different person, new wardrobe, everything, but I still wasn't happy. And I was very anxious, still very self-conscious, self-image issues. But one good that came from it was like the resilience of showing up day after day after day. And I have a tattoo that says HUH365+1. And it is that reminder of taking one more day at a time, one more step, and that you can do it through all the anxiety, the OCD, the intrusive thoughts, all that kind of self-doubt and negative self-talk for 12 years when I was, let's say, 12 to 24. And I've incorporated that directly into my business in the sense that, one, I've created a tool for people to start conversations, but two, look what you've done for those 12 years. If you can go through that, you can set up a business and you can get money in and you can get customers and you can promote yourself on TikTok because you've been through the hardest times ever. Never mind, like business ownership is relatively easy compared to struggling with your mind. And that's kind of like the long-winded answer for you, but there's lots more to it, but I'm obviously conscious of not talking for an hour straight.
You spoke there about as well, that negative self-talk and how many of us, I think, are walking around a lot of the time with a real inner critic and we're not addressing it. We just move from one day to the next. This becomes a massive barrier. We're filled with limiting beliefs. We don't challenge them. What did you do over the years to, I suppose, be more mindful of that? How I'm speaking to myself, being more supportive.
Yeah, so there's 2 things. One, I went to professional help, went to a therapist, and I was 24. So this had gone on for like 12 years. And I remember going to therapy. And again, this is one of the reasons I set up this brand is I went an hour away from where I was from to go to therapy because I was afraid of people seeing me walking into a therapist's office. So I drove to Drogheda, went in, and it was my first time ever in a scenario like this. And I sat opposite the woman about 10 feet away from me. And she basically reframed my way of thinking. And I was like, I never have understood or heard a perspective like this. We did some breath work. I'd never done breath work in my life. And I was like, I feel like I'm like having an outer body experience. I've never done drugs in my life, but I was like, this does not feel right. And at the time she said something to me that will stick with me forever. And I say it time and time again she said, you're talking to yourself so negatively, Mark. I want you to picture your best friend. So I just named my best friend Darren. She goes, if you speak to Darren the way you speak to yourself, you'd no longer have Darren. So you need to speak to yourself like you're speaking to your best friend. And that stuck with me forever. And when I was in the room and we were doing that and a mixture of breathwork techniques, like I said, it was like an outer body experience. And I felt like I was sitting beside her, but looking back at me. And I felt sorry for myself of like, why did you allow yourself speak to you that way forever? Because if someone else spoke to you that way, you'd be telling them where to go. And that really changed my perspective. So that was one. And the second thing is challenging my mind and my body in terms of like, let's say exercise. So for example, last weekend, like I mentioned, I did a long run and cycle and I'm fairly wrecked after it. But the reason I did it was to see how far I can push the limits and in a way, prove myself to myself. And that can be both good and bad, but it's kind of like, you're well able for this. Look how far you can go when you push yourself and stop listening to your inner thoughts.
Talk to me about why it's good and bad.
Because there's a part of me that I shouldn't have to prove myself to anyone. I should be happy with who I am and what I have. But it's kind of that desire to want more and more and more. And over the years, as I became obsessed with, let's say, the unhealthy food and then obsessed with the exercise, I'm a very obsessive character. I've eaten the same breakfast for the last 6 months. You know what I mean? I know I've said this a few times, but like, it is simple. It's easy. I know what it is. High in protein. Great. But I kind of get a bit tetchy if certain routines and habits change. So I think for me personally, one, I shouldn't have to seek validation, be it from myself or let's say I post that long distance stuff on Instagram and people are responding to it. Because a bit of it is that you post it on Instagram and you're kind of like, or Strava, hoping a few likes come in. And that's just calling a spade in all honesty. But as well as that is, I don't want to become too obsessed with it because I know that it can turn into a negative really quickly because it has in the past. And then when I was younger and I was doing the running and as good as it was for me and the habits I built, I could not go a day without doing the run or my day would be ruined. And I just think I wouldn't be as clued in. I wouldn't be as on the ball. I maybe wouldn't be as fit for my match on the weekend. And I never really let myself rest. So that's, I think, how it can turn into a negative for me quite quickly.
It's interesting as well how the two things that you spoke about kind of reinforce one another.
Yeah.
So the first one being the speak to yourself like you'd speak to your best friend. The second one being challenge your mind and body. And we can only really challenge our mind and body if we do speak to ourselves like we are our best friend. Because as you said there, challenging the mind and body then can become in ways something that actually is draining for us because nothing is ever good enough.
100%. But you know what I have a problem with, right? And I really struggle with this. So let's say now I'm tired, right? I'm wrecked. So I'll give you a real life example. Yesterday, I went to the Phoenix Park for a run. I've been running the Phoenix Park 3 nights a week for the last 8 months, okay? Went for a run, but I knew on my drive to the park, because I bring my bag every day, so I have no excuse. I knew after work, I was like, your body's not able for this. But a part of me was like, I'm going to prove myself wrong here. We're going to go for a 5K PR, right? Which was a bad decision. After 3.3 kilometers, I had to stop. And it was the first time I've stopped in a run in I don't know how long. So the issue I have is kind of figuring out, right, if you're in business and if you're like into sport or exercise, whatever it is, you do have to rest. But I don't want to fall into the trap of like, I'm resting too much. So this kind of hustle culture, I'm struggling to even try to explain it here.
I'm clear, very clear.
But it's kind of like, am I resting because I need the rest or am I resting because I'm being a little bitch? And so, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you want to get into the top 1%, you have to do what others won't. Like you really do. And you have to go places where others won't. So that's what I struggle with is like, it's 2 a.m. now. Should I go to bed? I'm like, but Jeff Bezos is probably up till 4 a.m. You know that type of thing. And you're not going to build that unless you put in the work.
And that's brilliant, Mark, that you've brought that up because I think there's going to be so many listeners that can resonate with those thoughts and managing those thoughts. And you mentioned the top 1%. You know, for you, what's the importance about getting into that top 1%? Where does that drive come from?
I honestly think it stems from a few different things, but one of the main ones is the point of me saying I'm trying to work on proving myself. And growing up with my mental health struggles, I felt like I was never good enough. And my anxiety, my self-image and my self-confidence issues led me to believe that. So now I'm constantly trying to prove myself to myself, but also, to be honest, the people around me to say, look, I am good enough. This is what I'm doing. However, I've noticed over the years, once you do, it's never enough. And that's another thing you have to try balance. So for example, if I heard a stat on TikTok, I could be completely wrong here, but it says anyone who's ran a marathon is in the top 1% of the world of runners because a lot of, like most of the world don't run marathons. Yeah. And I was like, I've ran 3 this year, but I want to do like ultra marathons now and I want to keep going further and further. And I totally understand like that's a great thing, but it can turn quite negative quite quickly when I'm overdoing it. So yeah, it's something I struggle with on a daily and weekly basis of constantly trying to prove myself to the world. Like I'm a brand ambassador for Mini Ireland. So realistically, I'm in the top % of whatever that is because not many people get free cars and it's so surreal. Like a random guy from Ashburn, County Meath getting a car from Mini Ireland. I have my own company and just we have customers in the NFL, we have customers in the League of Ireland, the GAA, all over the world. But a lot of the time it's like, no, I still want more.
Yeah.
And I don't think that will ever go away.
No, and I think, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm listening and I'm really relating because I have those struggles myself, and I
Yeah.
know a lot of founders that have those struggles. And I think what's interesting is I know a lot of founders, business owners, executives that are in their 50s and 60s and still having those struggles. So what's interesting is you look at new founders, they're having those struggles. You look at individuals at the latter end of their careers and they're still having those struggles. Where does acceptance come in for you around, actually, you know what, I am doing an incredible job. This is actually good enough for right now. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stop. I'm going to be any less motivated. I'm still going to be moving forward towards my goals. But it's okay to be content with where I am right now while also still focusing on where I want to go.
That's a really, like, I'm glad you brought it up, because this week alone, I've been trying to, like, and well, the last month is like, be happy with what you have and where your feet are, because you can have great big goals and dreams and plans, and that's super. Don't let anyone ever try to take it from you. But it's the days and the weeks that add up to those months and years. So I'm really working on trying to be present, and if I can be present, it can actually help a lot with my kind of need to prove myself. Whereas if I'm like, no, be where your feet are today, be in this room right now, stop worrying about what's going on in a month from now or a year from now, because all these days and all these like podcast appearances and networking and meeting new people, they all add up to the end goal essentially. And before we went live, you're like, if you ever need a connection here or there, let me know. And it's these smaller wins that I kind of need to remind myself to focus on, and not trying to go hell for leather at the biggest one, and take my time and literally be where I am. Because, like, as I say, the best present is your presence, to actually spend it with people in their company. And as well as that, in terms of like mental health, I've noticed when I'm constantly in my own head, be it with business or life or family, whatever it is, it's when you get out and you meet people or your friends and your cousins, whatever it is, you recharge your social battery and you realize, okay, that whole thing's not too important. It's great to have it, but like, this is what's important, like human connection and being real and being honest and vulnerable, and even just sharing stories like this, because the people listening and watching, like, I can relate to that. And like you said, 6-year-old founders, to me, I'm 29, but we're all still kind of struggling with the same things. We're living the similar enough lives, just in different stages.
Yeah. And I think, for us, I'd be I'm a little bit older than yourself, but I think we have an opportunity to try to address some of these things now, rather than, unfortunately, if we don't, being in a position where we're 50 and 60 and never feeling good enough, never feeling like we've achieved what we wanted to achieve. Because I'm sure you're similar to me. I've set targets and goals for my own business, and I've hit those targets and goals. And instead of actually giving myself a bit of a pat on the back in the past, I've said, okay, what's the next one now? What's the next one? What's the next one? And I've had these conversations with some of those individuals I've mentioned who are in their 50s and 60s, and they would still have that same mentality. And it's kind of like that idea of, oh God, is that what I have to look forward to?
Yeah, no, but I think it's so important to have that in you, because I do not, and I will never accept the fact of like just people being lazy. I think if you want anything, you can get it if you work hard enough for it. I was brought up like with work instilled in me from the age of 16. I worked. I currently do 2 jobs right now with a full-time business. Like, you know what I mean? I am mad for work and I love it. And I just feel like when you rest, you rust. But it is about trying to find the balance of when is it good enough? Because like you said, you're constantly like, okay, we just got this big win, but who's the next client? So it really kind of goes back to that, like what I just mentioned of human connection, having good people around you who'll keep you, 1, grounded, and 2, be like, right, we're doing this now, leave the work.
Yeah.
So
and that's nice, isn't it, Mark? It's nice to have, I really like having people in my life that don't see me as, oh, that thing on LinkedIn looked amazing. You guys must be doing so good. I like people around me who actually, if my business doesn't come up in the conversation, it doesn't matter, because we've lots to talk about. It's not about, just focusing. It's nice to be able to actually get away and escape and realize that actually, that perspective of your business is not, you might feel like it's the most important thing in your life in a lot of ways, Monday to Friday. But actually, when you take a step back, it's certainly not. It's certainly not the most important thing in other people's lives, and it shouldn't necessarily be the most important thing in your life. It should be part of your life and an important part of your life and one of your priorities. But I just think this idea, and you talked about hustle culture earlier on, and yes, like we are, it's ingrained in us. You know, you want to be an entrepreneur, you got to get up at 5 o'clock, you got to work all hours of the day, etc., etc. But I just feel that that's a zero-sum game in a lot of ways, you know, and I just find also that what we portray needs to be a bit more, I suppose, all-encompassing rather than just, I eat, sleep and breathe my business and this is why I'm successful.
But you hit the nail on the head there. Only this week, it was earlier this week, I was like, I'm kind of getting sick of social media and seeing all these successful people. Right, okay, my business had a level of success, great, and I'm happy about it. But let's hear about the failures. Like, let's hear about the fuck ups. So I literally put it on TikTok. I want to set up a podcast called Fail Forward. And all I want to do is interview people about their failures, right? And you might think that's a bit negative or whatever, but it's real. But also those failures, I've learned way more when I've screwed up than I have when I've got a massive order or a massive client. You know what I mean? So when I've messed up, I've been able to apply what I've learned. Right, I'm not doing that again. But when we're going on social media and everyone's like, oh, I got this massive win, massive job and this and that. And you're kind of like, but let's scratch a bit deeper than the surface. Let's hear the real story. Let's hear the good, the bad and the ugly. And I tried to do that with my brand. And I think that's how I've built a community around me of kind of like, Mark just doesn't say the good. He says literally the good, the bad and the ugly. Yeah. So we have to like not fall into this kind of sense of like a false reality by looking at all these influencers or business owners of, this is what we did today. This is my new car. This is that. Well, like, tell us about something that went wrong because that's real.
Yeah.
You know?
And you're right. And I think like we get a lot of energy as well from when we do hear about people who have tried and failed and learned and moved forward. That can offer us a lot of solace. And also I feel that, you know, some of the aspects that we may shy away from, and I know, listen, I would be more active on LinkedIn from a professional perspective. I don't really do too much on Instagram myself and TikTok. But it's interesting how, like, we would probably shy away from sharing a failure on LinkedIn. We would probably shy away from sharing the fact that actually I clock off at 3 o'clock every day and I spend time with my family. You know, it helps me re-energize. I come back the next day naturally, mentally and physically re-energized, ready to go again. We wouldn't admit those things. And I just think it's quite interesting that, you know, a lot of these things are just constructs that were developed years and years ago, like the 5-day working week, which is being challenged at the moment. But again, hustle culture, you know, another one. There's extremely successful people out there who work maybe 6-7 hours a day and then they chill, they rest, they enjoy friends, they enjoy family, they enjoy their hobbies, and they get to continue to do obviously what they love, run their business.
Of course, but I've had days where I've sat in front of the laptop for 15 hours and I've got nothing done. And then I'd have a 2-hour day where I'm like on a time limit and I'm like, I've got way more done in that day, you know? But to give you like a real life example of me saying all this, last year, everything was kind of, shit was hitting the fan, essentially, right? Towards the middle of last year, direct-to-consumer sales were slowing down. This is before we made the pivot to corporate work. And now with the corporate work, touch wood, and thank God, is flying. But business was slowing down. I ended a relationship I was in. Really tough decision to make. And then at the end of the year, my mom got sick. So it was like 3 sucker punches within 6 months. And I was kind of like, what is happening? Like, does someone let off for 5 minutes? But it was like the toughest 6 months of my life, right? From June to December, whatever, how many months. And I had to reevaluate everything. So I took a step back from the business. So we still had all the bills coming in. We still had all the rent. The tax man had to be paid, everything. Like everything was still coming in or going out even, but nothing was coming in, right? So I had that financial stress just to add on to everything else. So I was in a really, really bad place mentally. And I was like, right, it's just time to take a step back. Cut off the direct-to-consumer orders. I did some of the corporate work to kind of keep the lights on. Brilliant. And I really just did nothing for 7 months. And I reevaluated myself. Like I said, I took up running again because that I used to always run. Started about 8 months ago. Went to the park 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week. It was my safe space. Started leaning more into the corporate side of my work. Went back to therapy. I went to therapy every week for 7 months. Only 2 weeks ago, we ended it. She was like, this is like a natural progression here. We'll maybe meet up once every 2 months now just to check in. And things are getting slowly but surely better and better and better. But I was gone for 6-7 months off Instagram, really. But I came back and I grabbed the bull by the horns and I was like, you might have been wondering where I am. This is what's been going on. Just as like to tell my community exactly, not the whole nitty gritty of all the details that some people don't need to know, but as much as I was comfortable with it, I was like, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. This is what I was struggling with. This happened in my life. I wanted to be real with you because that's what my brand is about. Whereas I could have came back and be like, oh, because we relaunched the brand. Oh, we just took 6 months off to do a whole rejig, restructuring of the business. And now we're relaunching.
And that would have been the, that would have been the highlight. That would have been what a lot of people probably would have done.
100%. And they probably would have thought, oh, he must be getting investment. There must be new people on the team. So I really could have just put up the smoke screen and said, taking a few months off, we're back bigger and better in February. But when I came back, I was like, no, I'm going to tell the real story here because I could spin this any way I want. And it actually made the relaunch be the best thing ever, like best launch ever. People were like, this is so real. Hundreds of messages, hundreds of emails saying, thanks for being so honest. Thanks for being so open. I've experienced something like this. So not only was it good for me to get it off my chest, because I do owe it to a certain degree to the people who supported me. Like I said, I don't tell them the ins and outs, but we tell them a lot. And then also it helped build an even stronger and closer and more tight-knit community of like, Mark's real. We're going to support this guy. Like, you can kind of get my personality and understand my struggles through the social media. Whereas it's not like, oh, it's just away, guys. We were getting this and that, and now we're back,
Yeah, and there's a fine balance, isn't there? Because as you said, you didn't need to tell everything. But there was a level where you felt, right, actually, I've got to be honest. I've got to be transparent and I've got to share this with people. And as you said, you got tons of messages as a result of that. So there is a fine balance, isn't there, between going too into the detail, but then also the other side, putting the smoke screen up and, as you say, kind of pretending everything was absolutely fine.
That's it. And there's certain things in life that just people don't need to know, regardless of whether you're an influencer or not. They're private. And I would never ask anyone those sort of details or information. And I would never, I don't think people would expect me to say, this is exactly what happened in your breakup or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So it was kind of very like a top line on certain topics of like, this is all you need to know. This is what's been happening. It was a tough time.
And what did that break give you? Like, obviously, it came at a point where you felt, even though your business, as you say, business, it's waves, it's ebbs and flows, isn't it? We have some great months and we have some tough months. And I think naturally that's ever present.
Yeah.
But obviously you took a decision to step back. You needed that 7 months. What did that 7 months give you then that you were able to, obviously, I suppose, reset?
So a few things. I was quite lucky in the break, okay? Because the stars just aligned and it was like it was meant to be. So 2 or 3 months into the break, TikTok came knocking on my door. And they're like, we've selected you out of 10 small, medium businesses in Ireland and the UK. We're going to give you all the support and funding. So it was kind of like, I nearly went into autopilot. They set up my business on TikTok Ads Manager. They funded me. They gave me mentors. They gave me training. And I set it up and then it just ran itself. So all this business was coming in, but it was very low maintenance kind of corporate stuff. It wasn't the day-to-day 100 orders. So that kept the business going. And I'm absolutely blessed. And I say it to them all the time because they had me in recently again for a big order and a talk. And I probably wouldn't, well, I wouldn't say probably, but I may not be here if it wasn't for them last year. Because like I said, there was all this money going out and nothing coming in. And then 2 or 3 months into it, TikTok came knocking. So that was a really, really kind of major point in the H2H journey to this day.
And tell me about, like you said, the little small steps, obviously they all add up, right? And you've been really humble as in saying there basically that, the stars aligned. But I'd imagine you were, consistently putting up good content to get on the radar of somebody like TikTok for them then to say, actually, we've selected you out of, top 10 in terms of small to medium businesses on TikTok and we want to get behind you and we want to support you. So you're probably being quite...
Well, yeah, like I think I posted on TikTok 3 times a day for 4 years. So I was a big user of the app. A lot of videos with like a lot of views, let's call a spade a spade. But I was very consistent and I put a lot into it. So I think that's how I came up on their radar. And so, yeah, it was really it was a lot of work. I remember in the box room of my parents' house with 0 followers and I'm doing TikTok trends and people are like, this is the most embarrassing thing ever. But now when you have like over 40,000 followers and a partnership with TikTok, a partnership with Mini, and Ireland's largest mental health awareness clothing brand, because we're the only mental health awareness clothing brand, I think. So yeah, maybe I'm kind of downplaying it a bit, but there was a lot of long days, long nights, and a lot of hours going into TikToks and editing and creating. So maybe I was deserving of it. Here's me.
How does it feel
self-talk.
how does it feel when you say maybe I was deserving of it?
Oh, it feels strange. But no, it was just a blessing in disguise. Like it was really, really needed. So
how does it feel, Mark, when you just said it there, but Ireland's leading mental health awareness brand? How do you feel when you are able to say that on a consistent basis to people?
Yeah, it's again, it's really weird. So what catches me off guard the most is I often forget how big and how influential the brand has been in our community. So I'll be in town, or I'd be in Ashburn or in Meath or Kildare, and you might bump into someone wearing your clothes and you're like, that's weird. I don't know who that person is. That's not my friend or my cousin or a friend of a friend. I don't know who you are. And I would go over every time, like, oh, nice hoodie, nice hat. Like, thanks very much. And they're kind of taken by surprise of like, oh, it's you. You own this brand. So it's those moments that are kind of the highlight to me. Okay, this is much bigger than I think it is. And it's gotten way more traction than I ever thought it would. Like, I was in Dublin recently. I was telling this story, and I was walking down Ainger Street. A man was walking towards me in a body warmer, HUH body warmer. And every time I see it, I'm just like, oh my God, what am I going to say? So he's walking by me, and without even thinking, I like slapped him on the shoulder. I was like, nice body warmer. And he looked up in shock, like, who just hit me? And then the penny dropped. He's like, oh, you're Mr. HUH, he said. And I was like, oh, thanks very much. He's like, I can't stop. I'm on the way to a meeting. And I was walking up to the meeting. I was like, I just slapped a random, like I just hit like my friend, you know what I mean? Like, I just hit him on the shoulder. I was like, you can't be doing that. But it's the pure and sheer excitement I get from it of like, oh my God, thank you so much for supporting it. But they're the moments. Or when I was over across there in Tesco here before coming here in Costa, even working away, I was driving out, and when I arrived here, checked my phone, it's like, were you just in Tesco, Holywell, whatever it's called? So they see the car, the branded car, and I always get like pictures of myself on the motorway or in the car because it's branded. So they're the kind of moments that really take me by surprise. I'm like, okay, you're doing more than you think here. Like, you're doing a good job.
Absolutely. What does the future look like for HUH? And let me ask you, has that changed in terms of, obviously it's very important to set ourselves goals, but I also think it's important to be flexible with those goals in terms of, okay, what I might have said when I started and founded the business, where I wanted to get to, it may look a hell of a lot different now based on the last number of years. So what does the future look like for you in terms of where are you looking to take HUH, and has it changed much since the early days?
So yes and no. I think just if for the future, one of the end goals has always been to take a more proactive approach to the bigger issues of, for example, why is it taking 8 months for someone on a waiting list to go get help at a public level, right? So that won't become an actual kind of actionable project until HUH puts me in a position of more maybe time, more freedom, more power, more money, whatever it might be, in an effort to do that. But until then, because that is ultimately the end goal of making a way more accessible services accessible for people of all levels and all walks of life across the country. However, I never want to go into politics, so I don't know what I'm going to do, right? But in terms of the business, I would love 4 sectors of my business under the umbrella of HUH. So I want one as like an athleisure department. So I'd have a mental health awareness, really into sport and fitness in the gym. I'd love a sportswear side of things for mental health with sports people and athletes. A good friend of mine played high levels of sport with Dublin. We have brand ambassadors now in the NFL. Like I mentioned earlier, Aaron Jones, who plays for the Vikings, is a big supporter of the brand. And I would love to do more in that space and like dive deeper into the GAA, the League of Ireland. Let's see what we're doing for mental health here and use HUH as a tool to kind of kickstart it. I'd like a casual kind of wear, streetwear kind of vibe of like, I'm not that trendy now, but you know, like those trendy lads you see and they're wearing oversized t-shirts and cargo shorts and all this sort of stuff. That sort of kind of streetwear vibe. I want the originals, just like this hoodie and the t-shirt, and then the corporate side of the business. So I'd have 4 different parts with 4 different teams under the HUH umbrella, literally going after 4 different types of people. because no one escapes their mental health, no matter who you are, where you're from, what you do, what you believe in. No one escapes it. From there, then I'd like to try take it internationally. So that's kind of the plan, and it always has been from the beginning. However, like I said, it's been a roller coaster, really good years, good weeks, good months. Things change, just like last year, shifted to kind of corporate focused business and corporate well-being and orders and talks. So the day to day, I'm very like adaptable, but long term, when the time comes, that's the kind of plan, as well as going back to study in this field, because I'm not trained or I'm not like educated in this area at all.
When you think about, you mentioned the big picture and then the day-to-day flexibility. How do you get the balance right between both of those? Because it is easy to get caught up in the being extremely flexible day to day, or the other side of it is you can be very much focused on that big picture without ultimately being able to adapt to the, for example, we all experienced the period of COVID where I don't know a business that wasn't impacted positively or negatively, right? Many businesses didn't come out the other side. That was very much we talk about the ebbs and flows, right? That was very much a downtime for many businesses. They didn't come out the other end. How do you get that balance right between having that future focus, moving towards a big goal, but also knowing that, the way I like to describe it is modularizing your highs and your lows. So you have a great day, you get a new client, whoa, brilliant. But also maybe you lose one of your good clients and you can't stay down for too long. You've got to think, right, how do I keep myself in the middle?
Yeah, again, I struggle with it because in the stage of business we're at now, it's really hard to see the bigger picture because I have like the blinkers on in the day to day. And I asked someone recently, no, it was actually a few months ago at this stage, but how do I like get out of my own way? And we all need kind of mentors and supports and kind of advice from people. And I was like, what's the best thing I can do to get myself out of my own way from the day to day? Instead of working in it, work on it. And because I find myself, and I'm sure you do the same, of like, I love to be hands-on in everything. And don't get me wrong, I can delegate like very well, and like I can hand off jobs to whoever I want during the week, my brother, whoever it is. But I really love being in the like trenches of it every single day. But the only issue is you have to kind of come out eventually in order to like take that next step. And to be honest, I'm not quite there yet. I'm still early in this process, in the journey. I have 3 or 4 lads on the fulfillment side of things who are like 30 years in the industry. And then I have my younger brother who does my kind of admin. So there's about 6 of us now. And that's definitely one step I've taken, but probably didn't even realize I was doing.
Yes.
So that has taken me out of it a bit because I don't touch now when order gets packed. They do that all for me. So that's one thing. There you go. I have an answer for it, but I didn't even realize it because I'm so caught up in it. But there's an answer for you. But again, that was probably the first step I've ever taken in kind of saying, right, let's take a step back, bigger picture. This is where the money is. This is how we can run this successfully. But in terms of going forward and how to continue to do that, I don't know if I'll know how to do it till I'm actually doing it. This is probably my answer.
That's a good answer as well, because I think it's probably the most truthful answer for us all. We have to, whether you're a business owner or whether you're a manager in a larger organization, I think there's so much of, okay, I learn as I move and I grow into these roles. And this idea, this notion that I'll just have all of those skills already before I even step into it. I think that is such a misconception that holds a lot of people back. Like you mentioned there about even, you've started the process without even kind of realizing it, And I think there's so many of us out there that get so much of our value from our technical ability. So you talked about loving being hands-on. So, nobody knows how to do the packing better than Mark. Nobody knows how, that experience. Nobody knows that better than Mark. For me in my business, it was training people at one time, taking exercise classes. Nobody could do that as good as me. And I got so much of my value there. But what you realize, and it's the same for a manager, they could be technically excellent, and that's the value they give to the company. And now all of a sudden you're expected to create environments where others can flourish and others can showcase their technical ability. And what's your job? Well, your job now is to create the vision, maintain the standards, keep an eye on the standards, but create the vision.
Yeah.
And I heard one individual say to me that if you're a business owner, a CEO, a manager, if you're not doing that, well, then you're not actually doing your role, because nobody else is going to do that. We like to use the word, like, you're the culture catalyst. You've got to create that environment for those around you.
You have to, you do. And maybe I will eventually get to that point where I am creating an environment to bring the best out of people who are working for me. Because that would be definitely a huge thing in the future in terms of, especially as a mental health brand, the culture I create in order to become a successful brand. You hear horror stories around the country and around the world, and you're kind of like, how do people put up with that? I'm a bit too impatient. If I was in an organization that was like that, I'd be like, right, I'm out the door. I actually value myself way more than this. Even though I've talked negatively to myself over the years, I'm too outspoken to be like, nah, that's fine. I'm like, not a chance. So I would never kind of expect people to do anything for me that I wouldn't have already done or that I don't already do. And that's kind of like the attitude I have. In terms of what we just spoken there earlier about being in the trenches, though, there was one important thing I wanted to mention was, especially if you're like starting out, I think people get really thrown off by all these strategies and business plans and business models and all these big technical terms. I was at an event during the week. It's kind of like, this is so unrelatable. Like, this is just bullshit. Like, can we not be real for a second? Like, this just does not make sense to 90% of the people in this room. And you can have all these strategies you want, but until you're actually in it and working and just doing it, you'll never know. And that's the main thing I would say in the school talks too, is like, don't let perfection be the smokescreen of insecurity. Stop saying, oh, wait till this is perfect. You just have to do it, and you have to learn, and you have to grow as you go, as I say. And there's only growth in discomfort. So, for example, when I'm going through it and I'm going through the toughest of times, I often remind myself of that. But last year, to give you an example, I was in the depths of it. Like, let's say last September, all over the place, not knowing what's going to happen next. My brother phoned me because he was living abroad. He's like, these few months are going to be the best chapter in your book, Mark. Remember that. And it was just something that really spurred me on. He's like, no one would read your book if you didn't go through something like this. It'd be a boring book if you just said, oh, I'm Mark and I've created this really successful business. They're like, no, they want to hear about your OCD, your anxiety, your intrusive thoughts, your failed relationship, this, your business nearly failing, TikTok coming and surprising you with this. And then it lifted you up again, and the shift to corporates. And it really opened my eyes to it. Like, anything can happen on a day-to-day basis. So it could be, I could walk out there now, bump into someone and say, oh, I have this construction company. I want 5,000 units of your t-shirts, by the way. Here's my card. You know what I mean? So it's those kind of things that keep me going. But like I said, there's no necessarily massive strategy to get there, because I'm so small still at the minute. It's kind of like I'm growing as I go, if that makes sense.
And there's beauty in that, isn't there? It's nice to, like, I know we can always say the grass is greener, right? If I had X amount of investment and all of these seasoned, veterans in terms of growing and scaling businesses, would life be easier? Would it be as enjoyable? That's what I ask myself.
Listen, I wouldn't say no if you're watching. No, but a time will come, and hopefully I'll set myself up and put myself into those positions. But for now, I don't think I'm ready for it. And hopefully that doesn't put anyone off my business. Like, come knocking if you want. But I always said I wanted to grow this quite slow and sustainably. And because over the years of trying to, maybe saying biting off more than I can chew, or just taking on too much, it's kind of like, just do it at your own pace. You're racing no one other than yourself here, Mark. Brilliant. Like, there's no timeline to this. You can chip away at this, and maybe you can go get a different job like I have, or maybe you can leave it for a few months and come back to it. Like, this is on you. No one else. No one's saying, hey, you've 10 months to get my money back to me. You know what I mean? Because I've bootstrapped this business. So it's, for now, I like it the way it is, even though it is stressful, and it keeps me up at night oftentimes. So yeah, I love it though.
No, I can see that. And I think what you mentioned there as well is really important to bring back up around. It was described in another episode of the podcast around this idea of us all experiencing seasons in our life. We're going to have our summer season where everything's going great, but we will have those winter months. And you're right. Like, who would want to read the story of HUH Clothing and Mark Donnelly in years to come if there wasn't a couple of chapters where...
Absolutely. You put it down. You're like, this is not real. Like, I'm not reading this shite, Way. I want to see the struggles, and because they're relatable and they're normal. And that's the whole point of my brand, is creating a normal, relatable and vocalizing mental health related struggles and issues. But like I said, if you picked up a book and the chapter was just all amazing and you're like, I got funded 100 million in my first 2 months and then the business was booming. You're like, okay, grand, well, fair play to you. That doesn't apply to me anyway.
Next.
Yeah. But I really needed it at the time, because when my brother said it, I was like, right, like, just yes, come on, let's go.
Mark, you've been a brilliant guest. I've got one final question for you, and it's the question that we finished the podcast with. In your business career, your life as a founder, what is one lesson that you've learned that you could leave our listeners with? If there was one that really stands out for you, what would it be?
So I honestly do think it's on the team of resilience. So it's literally on my arm, HUH365+1. And through the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything that's gone on my journey, is like just showing up for yourself day after day, because the days add up to weeks and months and years. And next thing you know, you're in a position that you probably don't give yourself enough credit for, like we discussed, of like, okay, thousands of customers all over the world, a partnership with Mini Ireland, partnerships with TikTok. And they wouldn't have happened if I was like, you know what, that week is tough. I don't know if I'll be able to pay the bills next month. Let's just not do it. And like, there's months where I haven't been able to pay the bills, and then the next month it all comes in and you're like, okay, thankfully we stuck with this. So it's literally the same team for my life. And if I ever do write a book, it's going to be called Resilience by Mark Donnelly. I'll have to get a ghostwriter for it now, but it is just day after day, step by step, trying not to kind of get overwhelmed by what you do want, but like staying in the moment, staying where your feet are, and just showing up for your younger self.
I really like that kind of staying where your feet are. You said that on Wednesday. That really resonated with me, and it's resonated again today, and I'm sure it will resonate with our listeners. Mark Donnelly, HUH Clothing, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.